Hello, and welcome to the 9th installment of Spartans Step Up, CWRU Community Response to COVID-19. This web series is coordinated by the Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University. I'm Jessica Berg, the Dean at the Case Western Reserve School of Law, and today our conversation will focus on how COVID-19 is affecting the judiciary. We have three extraordinary panelists with us here today, all of whom I'm proud to say are graduates of the School of Law. First, we have Justice Rebecca Dallet of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, class of '94. Before being elected to the court in 2018, Justice Dallet was elected as a judge to the Milwaukee County Circuit Court and then re-elected in 2014. Prior to entering the judiciary, she was an assistant U.S. District Attorney in Milwaukee County, and she also served as the court commissioner for Milwaukee County and a special assistant to the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Dean Berg.
We are also joined by Judge Edmund Sargus of the United States District Court for the Southern District of Ohio, class of '78. Judge Sargus was appointed to the U.S. District Court by President Bill Clinton in 1996. He served as the Chief Judge from January 1st, 2015 to September 13th, 2019. Judge Sargus is also an adjunct professor of law at The Ohio State University College of Law, where he teaches trial advocacy and evidence in trials.
Good morning, Dean. Thank you for having me.
And finally, we have Judge Michelle Earley, the presiding judge of the Cleveland Municipal Court, class of '99. Judge Earley has been on the Cleveland Municipal Court since her appointment in April 2009 and subsequent election that November. As the administrative and presiding judge, she is responsible for the business and overall direction of the court. Since joining the court, Judge Earley has presided over the dedicated domestic violence docket.
Good morning.
If you have questions for our panelists, please submit them to the Alumni Association via the chat feature on the live stream, or if you're watching via Facebook Live, you may ask them in the comments section. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, and we have a few that are already submitted. Let's start with a basic introduction from each of you. Would you please briefly explain how your work has been affected by COVID-19 and how things have changed in your respective courtrooms since the pandemic hit earlier this year? Judge Earley, if we can start with you, please.
So I'm in Cleveland Municipal Court, and good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here today. And Cleveland, we have, we're known for our volume. So as the municipal courts, we have a number of traffic cases and initial appearances that come through the city of Cleveland. And our dockets, typically our arraignment dockets have hundreds of cases scheduled. When COVID-19 hit, that was just not a possibility to have those many people in the courtroom. And even from the very beginning, when we kind of really didn't know what was happening and what COVID-19 was in mid-March, we actually decided when they were minimizing the number of gatherings that we immediately kind of shut down the big arraignments and the big courtroom dockets just because of the sheer capacity of not being able to have those people in the room like we normally would do. So we've had to shift a lot of things to doing a lot of things virtually, online, and via Zoom, and then also doing a number of things through our website. So we're utilizing our website to do a number of change of pleas, not guilty waivers, and we're kind of promoting and pushing that. So that's kind of, been very trying, but rewarding, because we're still making sure that we haven't stopped doing what we needed to do. We've just kind of reduced the capacity and kind of slowed it down.
Thank you. Judge Sargus, could you tell us a little bit about what's going on in your court?
We have the same kind of issues in our court. We don't have the volume. I have a lot of interaction with the municipal court in Columbus, and it's always amazing the difference in number of cases. We have a much smaller number, but we have a fair amount of traffic before the COVID-19 matter arose. First thing we've done is to stop jury trials. That happened in mid-March, and push as many matters as we can to video. So on our criminal docket, we're doing arraignments, we're doing the taking of guilty pleas, sentencing, supervision revocations by Zoom, and that has worked fairly well. The idea is to not bring particularly in custody defendants into the courthouse. It's dangerous for them, it's dangerous for the staff. So that has been a big change. We have recently voted to, as a court, to begin doing criminal jury trials, prioritizing cases in which a defendant's in custody. I will say we haven't had any yet. I know on my docket I have had several scheduled, but at the last minute the defendant has pleaded out. So we are easing our way back, but we're doing this month by month because frankly in Ohio at least the numbers seem to be going in the wrong direction. So I'm not sure we're going to be back to doing trials anytime soon. On the civil side, we are moving motions, particularly summary judgment, 12B6 sorts of things. And we've had, by Zoom, I've had a number of preliminary injunction hearings, but we have not had many in-court proceedings, and there's no plan right now to reopen civil jury trials until the situation improves.
Thank you. Justice Dallet, could you tell us about what's going on in Wisconsin?
Yes, so our court, as the highest court, had actually a very easy transition to being on Zoom because we have a very few amount of cases. We had oral arguments scheduled in the spring, and we were able to really quickly transition all of that to Zoom. So we always had recorded oral argument. We have a service called Wisconsin Eye, which provides that ability for people to watch our arguments. But now we've transitioned to, you can watch it live, and then later it's also on our website. So for us as a court, that piece was not too challenging. We do, however, supervise all of the courts in the state of Wisconsin. And so we have been very busy responding to surges in COVID-19. We initially issued orders requiring masks in all courtrooms in Wisconsin. That is still in effect. We shut down all jury trials and all in-person proceedings across the state with an ability for each of the counties to get approval by the chief judge in that jurisdiction to go back to some kind of in-person, with criminal jury trials being prioritized. So I will say we do have counties in Wisconsin that are conducting jury trials, and they are both civil and criminal. I know Milwaukee County a couple weeks ago did its first civil trial. We placed partitions in between jurors in the courtroom. There's PPE, and there is different type of management for jurors, spreading them out for purposes of jury selection. So we're constantly responding. I know our numbers have gone up as well in Wisconsin, and so we have counties that have shut down in response to that, and we're constantly responding to what's happening.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that we've received. One of the questions is, what do you think is the long-term impact of these kinds of changes on your court systems? I think we can look at that both as, how are you going to ramp back up? How are you going to deal with a backlog, as well as, are there any changes that you're seeing right now that you think might continue with your courts? And Justice Dallet, while I have you on the screen, why don't you start with that, and then I'll go to the others.
Sure. I think there is going to be some difficult challenges going forward. We have huge backlogs in our biggest counties, first and foremost, but everywhere across the state. So I just think from a systemic perspective, it's going to be challenging. But I also think there's some positives that come out of what's happened. We have now an ability to do a lot of hearings that were in person on Zoom. And I think this is going to help everyone. I think from a criminal perspective, not having to bring a criminal defendant, transport a criminal defendant into a courtroom for something like a scheduling or a initial appearance, for civil attorneys to not have to go to court and wait for hours sometimes to have a scheduling with a judge. So I hope that some of those will translate. I also think that from our perspective, for our court, it's pretty easy for us to go back to in-person, and we don't have the backlog. But what's happened now, I think, is maybe we have a little more transparency, and maybe more people are able to participate and to watch what happens in our state's highest court. And I hope that that continues as well.
Great. Judge Earley, could you tell us a little bit about what you think the long-term impact is for the Cleveland Municipal Court?
So I agree with the justice that a lot of things that we were utilizing in terms of having people come in, and now we see that some of these things can occur on video, that's actually a good thing and something that will probably continue. One of the benefits of being in this pandemic was that there are a number of judges who probably were very uncomfortable with the technology. There's some that had not even heard of Zoom. So kind of being forced to utilize different resources and, look at the fact that maybe having a number of people just sitting in the courtroom is not a good thing, pandemic or not, and kind of changing the way that we're able to do some of the cases that are in front of the court. We have a lot of specialized dockets in Cleveland. We have drug court docket, human trafficking docket, mental health docket, veterans court docket. And those are the dockets that they need the face-to-face contact. So, those dockets, we hope that at some point we can get those back and running and they get the personal interaction with the judge. But there are a lot of cases that's not necessary in terms of bringing the people for different types of hearings. I've had a number of people who have had violation hearings that I haven't seen, forever, who are calling in on Zoom and who are, doing hearings that way. So, I think that some of the stuff that we have to look at kind of continuing because it makes sense in terms of saving time and just being a better utilization of people's time in general, and just not having a number of people come to the Justice Center unnecessarily, and kind of looking at how technology can help us improve as opposed to just doing the same thing that we were always doing because that's what we always did. So I think this kind of forced us to say, are there ways that we can still, be safe but do things better? And are these things that we can continue throughout, after we get through the pandemic, to see if this is something that we're not sacrificing justice in terms of the face-to-face, but still, utilizing like our website and people being able to strongly encouraging them to enter not guilty pleas on the website or to kind of utilize the website to resolve minor traffic cases. I think those things should still continue because I think they're a benefit in terms of the just not having to come down to court in general. And those are the things that our court's going to continue with.
Thank you. Judge Sargus, could you tell us a little bit about the federal courts?
I think we've discovered a number of things. One is so many of our staff can work at home. So I think telecommuting may have a future. In terms of scheduling, the lawyers comment all the time how much quicker things are when they don't have to find a parking space downtown around a courthouse with very little parking nearby. In terms of the criminal docket, we have, just by way of information, most federal courts don't have a detention facility for defendants who've been detained. And then in normal times, when we have basically just a not guilty plea to be involved in a hearing, there has to be a production. U.S. Marshals have to go deliver. It becomes not just a health hazard in a pandemic, but it's also, we're seeing it's fairly inefficient. So we're now connected with every facility that we have people detained by video. I would assume for the non-disputed kinds of hearings, we may want to look at continuing that. And many of the civil matters that don't involve testimony, could be a settlement conference, could be the final pretrial conference, those sorts of things can be more efficiently handled by video. I'm not suggesting they're going to all go that way, but I think that will be an option that I expect lawyers to suggest a lot more in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you for a moment, Judge Sargus. You mentioned a bit about variations that you did in how the courts were run. One of the questions that came in was, how are accommodations being made for employees? Because as well as being court systems, you're also employers who were at higher risk for COVID. Also, how are accommodations made for defendants, lawyers, anyone else? For any of you that have people that are coming in or who have other kinds of accommodations that must be made, how did you handle those?
The chambers are generally closed. I was in the building yesterday. The building is basically empty. We have skeleton crews in the clerk's office, probation department, U.S. Marshal Service, and so on. But in terms of my personal staff, and the other judges are doing this as well, we give everyone the option to work from home, and that's been true since the second week of March. And I think, for those of you familiar with the chamber staff and for a federal district judge, we do a lot more motion resolutions than we do trials these days. So a person working on a draft opinion on a summary judgment motion can do that from home just as well as at work. So we've made sure everybody has what they need in terms of links to the rest of us. And that's where my life has changed. I'm doing so much more work from home, but I can give you statistics, but I won't. Our docket is pretty up to speed. The only thing that's really backed up, I probably have 4 or 5 civil trials that I would have liked to have completed. Once the pandemic is over, they'll be going first. But so we do have some backup, probably not as bad as Judge Earley, who I'm sure if we compared case numbers, we'd be amazingly different in terms of numbers. And that's my greater concern for our friends on the state court who go for a few months like this, and I can only imagine what the numbers look like.
And actually, I would like to go to Judge Earley next. Can you tell us how you're dealing with accommodations to the extent that you are dealing with anything that's in person?
So one of our big issues is that we're in the building with a number of other people. So we're at the Justice Center in Cleveland, and there 23 floors of individuals. So that's, the building is a lot of traffic, a lot of volume. We have, in the very beginning of the pandemic, we went to a skeleton staff. So we never closed, but we did do, we put a hold on non-jail arraignments and some of the things that we're doing where people were not in custody, but we never stopped doing the in custody cases because those things needed to happen. So I think I've probably been here every day since March, like nonstop, but we have staff here and, people have to kind of work with that. So we've been able to rotate them through. So we're working on a skeleton staff probably from March until June. And then, we kind of rolled back, catching up with some of the arraignment cases and, staggering them. We changed the entire way that we were even scheduling arraignment. Before, if you got a traffic ticket, the officer would just write, everybody comes and everyone knows in Muni Court, everybody shows up at 8:30 or 9. That's like the standard time. You either get an 8:30 time, you get a 1 o'clock time, and then it's just, cattle call of people. And, we've decided to not allow that and to send the jurisdictions that bring cases into Cleveland Municipal Court, they have a time. So your time is 8:30, your time is 10, your time is, 1, your time is 2. So it stretched out the day for the court, but it made it so that, we can't control the volume, but at least we can control the time slots. And sometimes that meant you had some downtime, and then sometimes it didn't. But what it ensured is that they're not a backlog of everybody coming at 8:30, because that didn't make much sense. We've allowed, a number of our staff can work from home. We've allowed that to occur, and continue to allow the people who can work from home to work from home. There are a number of people like the security bailiffs who can't work from home. So we've been very mindful of, if there's nothing going on in the court and, we don't need them, that we're allowing people to not have to stay, because it doesn't make sense to just sit around, especially when gatherings are not, a friend of this, of COVID-19. So we really kind of want to be, we've really been mindful of that. and trying to encourage as many things as we can do from home to kind of do that. In addition to that, the judges also have very restricted dockets to allow us to kind of accommodate, we have all agreed that we only have one in-person day. So we're, for the 12 of us, we only have one day where we allow people to come into the courtroom and we stagger those cases out. And those may be for things like domestic violence that you actually have, you need to see what's going on with that case. There are a number of judges who, if they don't have a specialized docket, they're not even using that court date. They're doing everything via video because our Ohio criminal rules allow us to Ohio criminal rules procedure allow us to do that. So a number of things are happening on video, and that kind of helps us with kind of catching up with the backlog. In the very beginning, even, when you put a pause on the number of cases that we have, and that's kind of what we did in March, and then you pick up in June, there were cases everywhere. I mean, it was hard. And we were finding cases after, just being able to find, and then just finding the people that you just haven't, it's of no fault of their own, but they haven't heard from you. So, they're not really looking to come to court, and, being able to send out information and get people back. And we weren't doing it by issuing warrants because that's not fair either, but just kind of sending a number of notices. So we're pretty close to being caught up, but we'll probably do, safety is very important for the staff and the people that come here. So we'll probably do another slowdown, probably, not a stoppage, but we'll probably kind of, accumulate a little bit of a backlog coming up because we want to make sure that we're being safe. And we'll probably, at my judge's meeting at 12:30, drastically reduce the number of people who are coming in terms of the staff. So it may even go lower than the skeleton staff, depending on what the governor says. So that's kind of how we're dealing. And we've actually had a lot of guidance from the city of Cleveland as well, where they've strongly encouraged us to allow people to work from home and not have people come downtown.
Great. I'm going to stay with you for just a second on a question that just came in that asked about the drug courts. Can you tell us the effect of COVID on the drug courts specifically?
So those are the specialized dockets are the dockets that we're probably most concerned with, because those dockets really work with the interaction of the staff and not just the staff. We have these dockets, and our drug court docket's been around for over 20 years. It's something that the judge really is the driving force. It's the kind of the spirit of the judge that kind of encourages people and kind of gets them into compliance. And so those dockets, the specialized dockets, have been very hard to kind of continue, but we've been able to utilize some of our in-person dates and then meeting in different settings. So you're not going to be able to have everybody that comes in for a drug court. And part of that is people are coming in, people are compliant, people are not compliant. And the benefit of having those people together is to show the people who are compliant, they get to have that's their congratulations victory, and they get an audience. And that is important because you're congratulating them on doing something they're supposed to do. For the people who are not in compliance, it's not necessarily the judge going to be punitive to them, but it's the judge encouraging them that they can get to the place that this other person got to because they see each other and they know each other's struggle. And those kind of things are important. And the graduations where your family comes. And, we really haven't been able to, we're still doing drug court graduations, but the families can't come because we have to reduce the number of people that are present. We can't do, you can't have all of the people that are coming for compliance like we used to have. And then we're also rescheduling them to where we're meeting in a different room. So we're not in the courtroom, we're meeting in different settings so that we have more space. But it kind of, those are one of the things that it's, we're staying involved in that and kind of making sure that treatment centers and all of those things, we're having those meetings via Zoom and doing what we can. But, those are the concerns that we have, because it's those cases, we don't want them to fall through the cracks, especially during a pandemic. I mean, it's stressful for everyone. And then you have someone who has, a substance abuse issue. Those are the people that we're really kind of focusing on. And even though we had like a pause in the docket from March to June, we never paused on those cases because, we know, pandemic and then overdose going up, it's you have to stay on top of that.
So this is leading us to some questions that are coming in about what kinds of impact COVID has had on the substance in areas that you have all been dealing with. And I want to turn to Justice Dallet and ask you to talk to us a little bit about some of the cases you've had to address that are specific to COVID. What kinds of issues have come up that you've had to decide about? And I know there's some before you that you can't speak about, but some that have already come up. What are you dealing with right now?
Well, we've had a number of cases come to us on the Supreme Court. We have, back when the pandemic first hit, we had an election case that came to us where our governor had postponed our election. Our April 7th election had put it in June, and there was a case that came before us to enjoin that and not allow that. And the majority of our court did grant the injunction, and the election did proceed in April, on April 7th in person. I dissented to that order of our court. We also then had a challenge in the spring as well to the ability of our Department of Health and Human Services to issue orders with respect to staying at home. That order was also struck down by my court, the majority of the court, and I wrote the dissent to that as well. And then we just took yesterday, a challenge to the mask mandate. It's essentially a challenge to the governor's authority to issue emergency orders, of which the substance of which include mandating masks. And we will be having oral argument. If anyone's interested in watching the oral argument, it is going to take place on November 16th at 9:45 a.m., which is Central Time, so 10:45 Eastern, and that can be seen on Wisconsin Eye. You can Google that. That is the service that provides our live stream. So I would say we've been extremely busy. This is on top of the types of orders we've had to deal with that come to us with issues taking place every day in our circuit courts. Things like taking oaths. We had to change our rules with respect to that. We allowed for the first time filing by email. We had never done that before. I mean, things we should probably be doing already. So we're responding constantly to those issues. But we've really been inundated with the combination of the COVID pandemic, but also the election.
Judge Sargus, I wonder if you could speak at all if there's anything that you've seen specific to COVID that's arisen. And then, because Justice Dallet also brought this up, we did have a question that asked, can people see anything going on in your courtrooms? Are there opportunities to watch what's happening?
Yes, on that specific last point, we have an electronic filing system. Everything is done by email, has been for about 15 years. But when the notice of hearing goes out, we don't use Zoom, we use GoToMeeting, but there is a call-in number so the public or the press can join the video conferencing. Nothing is hidden in that sense. I've had three areas where I've had case-specific COVID matters. The first one has to do with people in custody. We received an expanse of our jurisdiction about a year and a half ago with the First Step Act. It used to be only the Bureau of Prisons could decide if someone had gotten so sick that they were entitled to what's called a compassionate release. We now have the authority under certain conditions to grant a motion asking for compassionate release, and I have received probably 50. Many of them are from people who were just recently sentenced, and their claim is that they're at special risk to COVID-19 and I should grant them compassionate release. To be blunt, most of those don't fit the criteria that the statute talks about, but that's generated a lot of work for about every district judge that I know. For those of you who know where Bucyrus, Ohio is, they have an annual Bratwurst Festival that brings about 100,000 people. The organizers brought a lawsuit against the governor and Dr. Amy Acton, who had been the director of health for Ohio, and made a claim that with proper social distancing, that it would be unconstitutional to prohibit them from holding the event. We did have a full-blown preliminary injunction hearing by video, and I ruled against the plaintiffs, and they decided to not go forward with the event and did not appeal. But picking up on Justice Dallet, so she doesn't think she's the only one on the short stick when it comes to cases. I had a pretty interesting case back in March when the governor first ordered a shutdown of many facilities, having to do with the Ohio constitutional provision on initiatives and referendum. Back in the 19-teens, the Constitution was amended to require a large number of signatures. In this case, it would be about 400,000. But very precisely, the constitutional provision says that they have to be in ink and witnessed by someone who's present when the document is signed. The question becomes, does the pandemic, which prohibits crowding, circulating among large numbers of people at sporting events, malls, whatever, if that should be unconstitutional as applied? I found that it was, but I still required the number of signatures to be the same, over 400,000, and directed the Secretary of State to do a modified method of signatures, primarily through some type of electronic signature. I was reversed by the Court of Appeals, so that didn't stick, but there are a lot of election cases where we have facially neutral laws that are just fine in the normal run of things, but when linked to a pandemic, have the ability at least to impede the free exercise of someone's right to vote. So the Supreme Court's dealing with a lot of those. Every day there seems to be one or more. I think Wisconsin's had one there recently, if I'm not mistaken. So I think between now and Tuesday, we'll still see a fair number of grinds with regard to the COVID-19 and just how it interfaces with both the 14th and the First Amendment.
Thank you. Judge Earley, could you also comment on both the question of whether your proceedings are visible to the public in any way, and whether you've got anything that's very specific to COVID that's come before you?
So I haven't had anything specific that deals with COVID that has come before me. And when we're setting our Zoom hearings, our link is posted on the website, or our meeting ID and password. The judges all have a set meeting ID and password that never changes. So it's always the same. And whenever we're having hearings, anyone could log on and see what we're doing.
Great, thank you. Justice Dallet, let me go back to you on some of these questions, because we've mentioned you're facing a lot of these new issues. One of the questions that came up was, how do you determine precedent in a world that looks very, very different?
That is an excellent question. And I think that probably goes to certain people's philosophies about our Constitution, and whether it is a Constitution that responds to what is happening daily, or whether it is one that lives in the words of what was taking place back when it was written. But there are no answers obviously spelled out, and we are applying these rights of individuals in times of a pandemic. So when it comes to the right to vote, for example, making sure people have that right and can exercise that right, what does that look like in the midst of a pandemic? And is that right infringed by an inability to appear in person? We also have an issue, I neglected to mention a case that we heard but have not ruled on. But the issue in that case was an interesting one about a county clerk who had posted advice on Facebook about what people needed to do or not do in terms of a rule that we have in Wisconsin that allows people to not have a witness to an absentee ballot if they are indefinitely confined or disabled according to a statute. So we are addressing right now that issue, which obviously is something, who could have expected that? But in terms of the pandemic, how does the pandemic and how does potential illness or facing potential illness impact the ability to abide by that statute? So these are definitely novel concepts that we're dealing with, but we're fitting them into a framework that we always have of both our US and here in Wisconsin, our Wisconsin constitutional framework.
Judge Sargus, could you also speak a bit to how you think about precedent in these circumstances?
Well, going back to the initiative and referendum case, there are a fair number of federal election cases over the millennium, and the analogy I drew was rejected. Before I tell you this, there are a number of state statutes that don't provide in many states for any provision for changing an election date. And in general, of course, we all would agree with that. But there have been cases in Florida where on the day of the election at 4 a.m. in the morning, a hurricane wipes out a town. There's literally nowhere to vote. What happens? And the federal courts have said the election law that says it must take place on this day is facially constitutional, no problem with that. But as applied in this circumstance, violates the 14th and First Amendment. Therefore, the election is allowed to continue a week or two later. So that was the analogy I drew. We do reason by analogy. We also look at the text, as Justice Dallet just said, but also, what we have learned since.
Thank you. I want to go back to Judge Earley for a moment here. One of the questions that came in, you've mentioned how much backlog you had getting back up to speed and moving forward. The question basically asked, would you estimate a significant productivity increase of the court?
I don't think that I would agree that we had a significant productivity. I think that in terms of the backlog, we really had to kind of figure out how to stagger that to pull that in. And I think we're able to kind of do things a little bit differently. Some of the getting back to speed, maybe not having the number of pretrials that we would normally have, which we, in a lot of situations, knew that they weren't necessary to have that many pretrial hearings. So we were able to kind of not have a number of unnecessary hearings, but also working with the attorneys that are in front of the court, because we don't have the access, or we don't have the defendant present in a lot of instances. So we're working with the attorneys to provide the information so that we were able to get through a lot of discovery issues and a number of things, and even helping on some cases defendants or the defense attorneys find the clients so that we can kind of move forward. But it was really putting it on the defense attorneys and the prosecutors to work with the court so that we were able to kind of pull these cases back in and not start from scratch and kind of, we've had this amount of time, what are we doing with these cases? What's is this something that's going to have to be set for a trial, or is this something that's going to be able to be resolved, or is it something that, as the prosecutor, no longer have these witnesses available, period, so that we're just not gonna, we're not gonna have a trial on that. And being able to kind of have people focus on that and kind of change their focus has been very helpful. And it may be the number of, when you're with the judge for only a couple of days and they're very focused on what's going on with you, it's, it puts the pressure on the attorneys, but I also think it works out in terms of figuring out what we're doing with the case and whether or not we're going to go forward. And we've had a number of, at least in my room with prosecutors, indicating he's talked to the victim, or he hasn't been able to, get in touch with them despite his best efforts for a significant amount of time. He'll dismiss the case by motion and, leave it to where if at some point in the future he can refile that if necessary. So we're probably doing more of those as opposed to let's just wait and see till trial. And that's been very helpful because it's allowed us to handle more things without having to bring a number of people into the courtroom. But also sending people to the websites, I think, is very helpful because it makes it so people don't have to, come downtown. But even coming downtown, I think everyone knows, and as the other judges said, coming, parking and the different things that you have to deal with kind of encourages non-appearances on some traffic cases, and to be able to make things easier for people to resolve their traffic matters by just doing it online has been very helpful for us as well.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap up pretty soon here. And I so greatly appreciate all of the time that you've given us. I'd like to ask each of you to just very briefly tell us what you think has been the biggest benefit. And I know you've alluded to some of these things and some of the benefits you think you might extend, but what do you think has been the biggest benefit of this crisis that you hope we retain? We can start with Judge Sargus, please.
I'll be honest with you, I don't see a lot of benefit. I think, there's been a lot of worry. I think I have worked with a number of people who either themselves are at risk or have family members in a high risk category. So I think it's been relatively stressful. I think we've all learned that we can do a lot of our work from home other than the trials. And I know each of us on this call have different workloads. The one I feel the most for, no offense, Justice Dallet, but Judge Earley just has this huge number of cases. And when you miss a few months, they don't go away. For us, with motion practice and Zoom, I have a little bit of a backup. I was keeping track of the number of civil trials for a jury that I had to move back. It's been exactly 4. And as far as criminal cases with the defendant awaiting custody, it's actually none. So we're not backed up. But I think the greatest problem going forward is figuring out a safe way to ramp back up again. We don't want to put anybody at risk, but we know in civil cases that the longer we delay, that means justice is delayed as well. So we are very sensitive to that, but there are a lot of competing considerations. I think it's been a pretty difficult time overall. We'll get back to normal eventually, but I just hope it's sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Justice Dallet, can you see a positive in any of this that you'd like to see, continue?
I can. First, I'd like to share with you if you look behind me, this is our beautiful hearing room in our Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is located in our state capitol in Madison. It is a beautiful room, and I think coming in front of us to argue for an attorney and for us is really meaningful. And so I do miss that, as I'm sure the attorneys do as well. But I think that the biggest benefit from the pandemic has been an access to justice. And I know Judge Earley referred to this in her last answer. I serve as the chair of our Access to Justice Committee for the state of Wisconsin. And we are seeing people able to participate in justice in a way that they could not before. I think the courts, to a lot of people, seem out of touch, they seem unreachable, and for a lot of individuals, it's very difficult to make court appearances. So I think that the ability to go online and see a proceeding, to participate in something from home where you don't have to take the day off work, to come and wait in a courtroom. Some of those features, I think, really improve our access to justice. I mean, there's obviously the detriments of not being in person, and especially in the criminal area, we can't really make that up or substitute that in any way. But for the general individual, I hope that this lets people see what happens in our courts from municipal all the way up to the Supreme Court, and helps them to continue participation in those courts and to also trust in the outcomes of those courts in a way that maybe they didn't before.
Thank you. Judge Earley.
So I agree with, in terms of the access to justice that the justice just talked about. The other thing that I think is a benefit of the pandemic, the pandemic we're going through, and kind of something that I hope carries over, it's the ability to make, when we're making decisions and we're kind of talking about how to go forward and deal with some things in the Justice Center, how we're being forced to make sure that we're considering a number of different people, and it's not just focused on what you're doing in your area, but it's bigger than that. So I think even the, getting people to kind of, this has showed us how one person's actions can affect so many people, and how that just kind of, even in the building that we're in, I'm in Cleveland Municipal Court, but the Common Pleas Court is in this building, The prosecutor's office is in this building for the city and the county. There's clerk's office here. The jail is here. The sheriff's department is here. And if we all don't work together to make this a safe place, it's one thing I can say about me having my staffing level at skeleton staff and doing certain things, but it doesn't matter if other people are bringing a number of people in, and my essential workers are then being exposed because someone else has hundreds of people. And, being able to kind of, during this pandemic, we've all been able, the stakeholders in this building, to work together to talk out issues, to address issues involving the jail and the jail population, and how we're going to make sure that there's no major COVID outbreaks in the jail. Those things have been very beneficial in terms of saying we all have our area that we're responsible for looking at and making sure that we're protecting our staff and the people that come before us, but the responsibility doesn't just end there. And we really have to kind of work together so that we're responsible partners. And I don't think that we were doing enough of that prior to the pandemic. I also think, at least for my bench, the ability to, I like technology a lot. That's my undergrad degree in technology. So, technology is a big deal for me, and getting kind of everybody to see things a little bit differently has been challenging sometimes. And then, we have this area, and I'm having a discussion about, listen, you can still have hearings, but this is the way we have to do them. And then getting people on board to being able to have still have meetings. Our judges meeting is about to be on Zoom. So I think that it's allowed us to see that, technology, while it is not, again, in municipal court, there are a number of things that you have to do in person, especially the specialized dockets, the drug court, as someone asked. You still have to do those things in person. So your presence is important, but there are a number of things that you can do via technology. And I think that this has kind of exposed us to say that it actually does, it is very beneficial in certain areas. It doesn't cover everything. We still have to see people, but for the most part, we're able to utilize the justice. And, as the justice was saying again, access to justice. Victim in a domestic violence case may not have felt comfortable coming in to the actual courtroom, but calling into Zoom is very different. And they can still participate and be active and hear, even if they don't say anything, hear what's going on, and not have to be in that same room, in that same presence, or even in just the enormity of being in the Justice Center and going on the elevator and going through security and all of those things that we normally do is, very important. So I think it makes it easier for people to participate. And I think that that's important too, because, we want to make sure that we're being accessible, or as accessible as we can be.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. This has been a really, really interesting discussion. Thank you for the insight into all of your courtrooms and into what you're experiencing right now. I greatly appreciate all of your time. Justice Dallet, Judge Sargus, Judge Earley, thank you so very much for joining us.